Welcome back to the Weekly Education Pulse. I'm Sammy.
I'm Tony. Each week, we look beyond the headlines to explore the developments shaping the international and independent school sector.
Yeah, this week's stories take us from Chile, Brazil, South Korea, the UK, and Cambodia. So on the surface, they're very different, but together, they point to something much bigger.
There's no longer a single model of how education grows.
Yeah, in this episode, we're seeing expansion through acquisition, brand-led entry into new markets, premium positioning in highly competitive systems, domestic consolidation, and large-scale investment in emerging economies.
Different strategies, different markets, but all moving in a similar direction.
Yeah, let's jump into this first story, shall we? Where we're going to Chile, where global schools group Cognita has expanded its Latin American footprint with the addition of the English Institute in Santiago. This takes Cognita to 18 schools in Chile, reinforcing its position as one of the most established international school operators in the country.
What makes this particularly interesting is the type of school involved. The English Institute is not a new campus or a premium international startup. It is a long-established school founded in 1976, delivering the Chilean national curriculum with a bilingual Spanish-English environment.
Yeah, and that distinction matters because increasingly growth for global school groups is not just about opening new international schools, it is about acquiring well-positioned local schools with strong reputations, stable enrollment, and deep roots in their communities.
And in markets like Chile, that strategy makes a lot of sense. You already have a mature private education sector, a strong culture of bilingual education, and consistent demand from middle and upper income families. So rather than building from scratch, operators can scale much more efficiently by integrating existing schools into their networks.
And what Cognita brings in return is its global infrastructure. Students gain access to international exchange opportunities, while teachers and school leaders benefit from professional development programs, including those developed with UCL's Institute of Education.
So the value exchange is quite clear. Local identity and reputation remain intact, but are complemented by global scale, shared expertise, and operational support.
Yeah, more broadly, this reflects a trend we're seeing across the international school sector. Expansion is becoming less about geography and more about consolidation within markets where operators already have a presence.
Which raises an important question for the sector. As groups like Cognita continue to scale within established markets, what does that mean for independent schools operating outside of these networks?
Yeah, it's a good question because increasingly competition is not about curriculum or facilities, it's about access to global networks, talent pipelines, and the ability to operate at scale.
And that shift may well define the next phase of growth in international and private education. And our second story takes us to Brazil, where Malvern College is expanding its international network with the launch of a new school in São Paulo. This will become the group's first campus in South America, adding to its growing presence across Asia, the Middle East, and Europe.
Yeah, and what's interesting is the model because unlike the previous story, this is not an acquisition, it's a brand-led expansion where Malvern is extending its education model into a new market through partnership.
And the school will deliver a British-style education with a strong emphasis on academic excellence, holistic development, and pathways to global universities. And it will sit within Sao Paulo, one of the largest and most competitive education markets in Latin America.
Yeah, and that makes a bit of a calculated move. Brazil has a large and growing upper middle class population, increasing demand for international pathways, and a relatively unpenetrated international school segment compared to markets like China or the UAE.
Same time, it's not an easy market to enter. Regulation, localization requirements, and the strength of established bilingual and national private schools mean that new entrants need to be really clear about their value proposition.
And this is where the brand comes in. Malvern is not just exporting a curriculum, it's exporting a heritage, reputation, and a positioning that appeals to families looking for globally recognized education pathways.
We're seeing this more and more, well-established UK independent school brands establishing internationally, often through partnerships, to capture demand in markets where families are increasingly internationally mobile and very much university focused.
And it brings up an interesting point. Success in these markets is not guaranteed by brand alone. Schools need to balance global identity with local relevance, particularly in countries with strong national education traditions.
In contrast to our first story, where growth comes through acquisition and consolidation, this growth is through brand extension and market entry.
Yeah, and together these two stories highlight something important. There's no single model for expansion in international education right now. Operators are using different strategies depending on the maturity, structure, and opportunity within each market. And our third story takes us to South Korea and a development we have actually touched on in a previous episode. So earlier we spoke about plans for Wycombe Abbey to open a new campus in Korea, marking another step into the expansion of UK independent school brands into Asia.
And now we're starting to see more detail emerge around how that project is going to take shape. The school is being developed in partnership with local stakeholder, with a focus on delivering a premium British-style education model into one of Asia's most academically competitive markets.
And this makes, Korea a fascinating case. This is not a market lacking in education quality, but quite the opposite. South Korea is one of the highest performing education systems globally, with intense competition and deeply embedded culture of academic achievement.
The question becomes, what role does the international school like Wycombe Abbey play in that context? Because it's not simply about offering better academic outcomes.
Exactly. The value proposition is quite different. It's about alternative pathways, international university access, a broader co-curricular experience, in many cases, a different educational philosophy compared to the highly structured domestic system.
Why we're seeing continued interest from UK premium brands entering markets like Korea and Southeast Asia. This is a segment of families actively looking for something different from the national system, particularly those with a global mobility in mind.
Yeah, and this is not a straightforward expansion. Korea is a complex regulatory environment, and international schools operate within defined frameworks that can limit access to certain student groups, predominantly locals, as well as the way that you can generate profits from private schools.
Which means that these projects need to be very carefully positioned. They're not mass market plays. They are highly targeted premium offerings designed to appeal to a specific segment of the population.
Yeah, and it's where it connects back to what we were seeing more broadly across the sector, whether it's Malvern entering Brazil, Cognita consolidating Chile, or Wycombe Abbey expanding into Korea. The strategy is becoming increasingly nuanced.
Different markets require different models, and success depends not just on the brand strength, but on how well that model is adapted to local demand, the regulations, and, of course, cultural expectations.
So this is more than just another school opening. It's another example of how global education brands are navigating some of the most competitive and complex education markets in the world.
Yeah, and our fourth story this week takes us to the UK, where Warminster School has joined the QED Schools Group. This marks another example of an independent school becoming part of a wider group structure, a trend that has been gathering pace across the UK sector in recent years.
Yeah, Warminster is a long-established independent school, and its move into a group setting reflects a broader shift we are seeing. Because for many schools, operating independently is becoming increasingly challenging in the current environment.
Yeah, rising in operational costs, regulatory pressure, and changes to the policy landscape are all putting strain on traditional standalone models. And joining a group can offer a degree of stability, shared services, and access to centralized expertise.
Yeah, that may include support in areas like finance, HR, marketing, compliance, and even curriculum development. So in theory, it allows school leadership to focus more on education delivery while benefiting from the efficiencies of scale.
It also represents a structural shift. The UK independent sector has historically been highly fragmented, with a large number of schools operating autonomously. That is starting to change.
Yeah, and we're seeing more schools reassess what independence actually means. Is it full autonomy, or is it the ability to retain identity while being part of a larger organization?
Groups like QED are positioning themselves to offer that balance, providing operational support and long-term sustainability while preserving the individual character of each school.
And this connects quite clearly with our earlier stories, whether it's Cognita, expanding Chile, or premium brands entering new markets. Scale is becoming increasingly important across the sector.
But here we are seeing the same dynamic play out in different way, not through international expansion, but through domestic consolidation and group formation.
And that may become even more significant in the UK over the coming years, particularly as schools navigate financial pressures and evolving government policy. And our final story this week takes us to Cambodia, where $50 million investment has been announced to develop a major new education project. The investment has been positioned as a landmark step in expanding access to high-quality education, reflecting growing demand across the country.
And Cambodia is a really interesting market to watch right now. Over the past decade, we've seen steady economic growth, rising incomes, and expanding middle class. And with that comes increased demand for private and international education.
And what's particularly notable here is the scale. A $50 million investment into education infrastructure is significant for a market like Cambodia and suggests strong confidence in future demand.
Also reflects that broader trend we're seeing across Southeast Asia. Education is increasingly being viewed not just as a service, but as a long-term investment opportunity, closely tied to urban development, workforce growth, and economic positioning.
And in many emerging markets, international and private schools are often at the forefront of that development. They're typically quicker to expand, more flexible in their models, and able to respond rapidly to changing expectations from families.
Of course, this comes with a challenge, ensuring that growth is matched by quality and that expansion is sustainable over the long term.
Yeah, because as markets like Cambodia evolve, competition will increase, expectations will rise, and schools need to differentiate more clearly.
Brings us back to the bigger picture, whether it's investment in Cambodia, consolidation in the UK, expansion into Brazil, or acquisition in Chile. We're seeing multiple forces shaping how education grows.
And increasingly, those forces are not acting in isolation. They're overlapping, reinforcing each other, or reshaping the structure of the global education market.
Brings us to the end of this week's Weekly Education Pulse.
And what stands out across these stories is just how many different forces are shaping education right now, from global school groups and heritage brands to governments, investors, and local communities.
And importantly, they're not all moving in the same way. Some are scaling through acquisition, others through brand expansion, others through investment or structural change.
Which means the future of education is not being defined by a single trend, it's being shaped by a mix of strategies, each responding to different market conditions.
And that's what makes this sector so dynamic to follow.
So if there's a development in your region we should be covering, please do get in touch.
We'll be back next week with another Global Snapshot.
Till then, see you next time.